Everyone. I'm Mrs. Mayat, and I am reading from the Wishmakers. And today we're reading chapter 25, 26, and 27. Okay, chapter 25. Here we go. The two of us plummeted from the upside down roller coaster, flapping our arms like useless wings. Then, oomph! We landed in a soft pile of stuffed bears, instantly smothered by cuteness. Moo, moo! I tried to shout, but a flannel bear managed to slide its paw under the visor of my helmet and right into my mouth. I twisted and thrashed, spitting out the fuzzy hand and screaming again, Moo, moo! This time I felt the consequence pull me to the ground before I saw Ridge turn into a shark. My stomach hit the pavement, and I was now the very bottom of the super fun Happy Bear doggy pile. Then the stuffing started flying. Shark Ridge erupted from the pile, his rows of razor teeth shredding through the stuffed bears. Darting through the air as though it were water, he batted the bears away with his powerful tail. In a moment, the way was clear, but I couldn't stand up to make my getaway while Ridge was still a shark. Moo, moo! I called, and he was a boy again. His mouth was full of polyester fluff. We staggered to our feet, the bears chasing us again. There were angry looks in their cute, furry faces. Ridge kept spitting out stuffing as we ran. We have to get out of here, he said, as if I didn't agree. This is unbearable. Really? That was the word he wanted to use? With a wake of plush animals, we arrived at the bumper car's ride where I had seen the cotton candy man disappear. Standing guard at the gate to the arena was a tie-dyed bear, about waist high. It put up its paws in a boxing stance, and I kicked as hard as I could. Apparently, as hard as I could wasn't hard enough. The tie-dyed bear wrapped around my leg and held fast. I stepped back but couldn't shake it. At least it was out of the way. Ridge and I ducked inside. Running with a stuffed bear clinging to your leg was harder than I'd have imagined. We spotted a pinstripe suit, a flat-top hat, seated in one of the tiny vehicles, racing around in a tight circle. The moment he saw us, he turned his car around and sped toward us on a collision course. I tried to back up, but stumbled into an empty car. Then before I could step out of the way, the crazy cotton candy vendor struck. My leg was pinned between the two cars. I expected to hear the sound of my shins snapping, accompanied by a crushing pain. But fortunately, I had a giant stuffed bear still wrapped around my leg. My shin was saved, but the super fun Happy Bear wasn't so lucky. The stitching between its ears split and its head exploded in a puff of synthetic stuffing. The cotton candy man reversed, his pink mustache twitching in a menacing way. Ridge and I had only one choice: get into the empty car. It was barely big enough for two boys our size. I shook off the remains of the tie-dyed bear, and we managed to slip into the padded seats before the man rammed us again. We bounced backward, spiraling across the arena and colliding with another empty car. The super fun Happy Bears must have been doing a decent job of holding back the tourists because we had the arena to ourselves. A few of the stuffed animals had decided to join us. They raced forward, laden with tools and scraps that they must have pilfered from other places in the park. I stepped on the pedal, spinning the wheel and reversing around the approaching pests. But they didn't seem interested in us this time. They surrounded the cotton candy man's car like a multicolored pit crew. I craned my head to see what they were doing, hoping the little creatures had turned against him. In a moment, they were done. The super fun Happy Bears backed away from the car in an almost ceremonial fashion, allowing me and Ridge to see their handiwork. The man's bumper car was now a shredding machine. The stupid bears had installed blades and spikes of scrap metal all around the small vehicle. "We can't let that thing hit us," Ridge said. "We'll get ripped to bits." The vendor came racing toward us. I swerved at the last second, and his armored bumper car tore into an empty vehicle behind us. I spun us around, but he reversed with intense speed, swinging sideways and slamming into our car. The jagged metal that the teddy bears had installed sunk into our side bumper. One sharp blade pierced through the thin wall of our car, stopping just inches away from my hip. Ridge screamed, and I jerked the wheel, trying to spin away from the man. But in the collision, his deadly spikes had locked our cars side by side. We were stuck to him, getting dragged across the arena as he zoomed in a wide victory lap. To make things worse, the super fun Happy Bears were climbing into the other empty cars, strapping on seat belts and closing in on us, their adorable little faces twisted with road rage. "We're doomed!" cried Ridge, throwing his hands up in the air. I glanced over at the vendor. He grinned at me in a way that made me feel like it was a challenge. Beside him, lying on the seat, were the 3 paper cones, each wrapped with the green cotton candy. "Take the wheel," I shouted to Ridge. Our wheel was pretty much useless because we were anchored to the empty car. But it seemed like the right thing to say. I reached out, my hand groping for one of the cotton candy cones in the next car. "It's too far," I said. "I can't reach it." My fingers stretched, but the man with the pink mustache swatted my hand away as he drove. I leaned farther, but the teddy bears started slamming into us, and I was afraid that a well-tipped bump would throw me out of the car, only to be driven over by one of them. "I need to get closer," I said to Ridge. "You want to get closer?" he answered. "I want to get farther away." I gritted my teeth and reached out as far as I could, but the cotton candy was still 5 inches away. "I wish I could reach that cotton candy," I shouted. "Here's the deal," said Ridge, uselessly wiggling the steering wheel of our bumper car. "If you want to reach that cotton candy, then your tongue will turn green." "How green?" I asked. "There are at least a dozen shades of green. It might not be so bad if my tongue were just tinted a light lime." "Really green," he said, "like the color of grass at the park." "How long will I stay that way?" I was still reaching for the cotton candy, hoping that I would be able to grab one naturally and not end up needing the wish. Forever," said Ridge. "Sorry." "Green tongue forever?" I glanced down at the hourglass on my outstretched arm. The white sands were nearly spent. Bazang! I don't know exactly how it happened. Maybe my arm got longer. Maybe the cars got closer together. Whatever happened, the universe fulfilled my wish, and my fingers instantly closed around the nearest cone of cotton candy. I gave a shout of success and flopped back into the seat beside Ridge, holding the airy treat aloft. Really, by this time, the cotton candy looked pretty nasty, all matted and barely holding on to the cone. But it was what we had come for, so in my mind, it looked like a victory. I ripped off a bit and pushed it under the helmet to my lips, inhaling a bit of the sugary fluff. It melted instantly in my mouth. Eating cotton candy like this would turn anyone's tongue green, but now mine had the unique privilege of staying that way. The vendor slammed on the brakes, and both our cars came grinding to a halt. The arena was quiet now. All the super fun Happy Bears that had been trying to ram us were unbuckling their seat belts and stepping out of their bumper cars. Something outside the arena seemed to be drawing their attention. They scampered off, uninterested in me and Ridge. The man in the pinstripe suit looked over at me. You walk a dangerous road, youngster. He picked up the 2 remaining cones of cotton candy and stepped out of his souped-up bumper car. Aren't you going to try to stop me? I taunted, pushing another bite of cotton candy up to my mouth, the green sugar melting on my tongue. I already tried, he said, but you've completed the second task. There's nothing more I can do to stop you. But you must be warned. The undiscovered genie has a taste for chaos. He was locked away for a reason. He tipped his hat and raced off in the same direction that the Superfun Happy Bears had gone. That guy was crazy, Ridge said, carefully climbing out of our damaged car. I don't think he was quite, I don't know how to say it, human. I still didn't know what the ancient consequence was, but it seemed the cotton candy vendor and Roosevelt's big head had both been charged with stopping people from completing the tasks. Ridge nodded in agreement. Reaching over, he plucked a tuft of cotton candy off the back of the cone and folded it into his mouth. I wasn't too excited to share my treat when I was the one who had to bear all the consequences to get it. At least the cotton candy was tasty. Chapter 26. Ridge and I had just exited the amusement park when a large black pickup truck swerved onto the sidewalk to cut us off. My first thought was that it was the FBI responding to the strange report of killer teddy bears. But the universe would have shielded innocent bystanders from the bizarre truth. I don't know what parkgoers thought was happening. Maybe the universe made it seem like a strong wind was blowing the stuffed animals around. My second thought was that Ridge and I were about to get abducted by whoever was in the truck. But then the window rolled down and my jaw dropped at seeing someone I recognized. It was Tina. You 2 need a ride somewhere? She asked. Her pink feather boa was gone, but otherwise she seemed unchanged. I felt instantly relieved to see her, though I still remembered the betrayal I'd felt when she left us in the boxcar. I thought you were at Thackeray's team now. I tried that out, she answered. That guy's a jerk. That's what I've been saying, Ridge mumbled. Did you save his life? I asked. Not yet, Tina answered, and now I really don't want to. Vale and I met up with the Anderthons at Superfun Happy Place, but Thackeray wouldn't even let us come near. She gestured over her shoulder. Climb in. Vale was in the passenger seat, but the cab was extended, so Ridge and I climbed into the back seats. Where's Thackeray now? I asked as Tina reversed and then sped across the parking lot. Still in the park, I think, said Tina. I hated the thought of that despicable man on the loose in an amusement park full of kids. We lost him, said Vale. We were buried under an army of stuffed bears by the time we got free. Thackeray and his son were gone. Ah, Ridge said, you met the bears. The man with the pink mustache, Tina said. The cotton candy was just out of reach, and I had to wish to grab it. She stuck out her tongue at me. I thought she was being rude until I saw her tongue was bright green. Same wish, same consequence. The universe was rarely fair, but it had given us equal treatment today. Same thing happened to my tongue. I stuck it out, even though she couldn't see it with my helmet on. I tried a couple of tactics, but in the end I had to wish for it directly. What about Jathan? Ridge asked. Do you think he got the cotton candy? Val nodded. They were still working on it when we left. He even had his genie outside of her jar. Her name is Scree. What kind of name is Scree? I asked. I thought genies were named after the location where their jars were first discovered. I glanced at Ridge, aware of how he had bent that rule. That's right, said Val. Her jar must have been discovered on a slope of scree. I thought scree was the sound a bird makes, Ridge said. No, answered Vale. Scree is another word for a bunch of loose rock. Why didn't they name her Gravel? I asked. And while we're on the topic, what exactly is a vale? It's basically a valley, she answered, but Vale had a better ring to it. Like ridge versus kitchen. Jathan and his genie were bent on protecting Thackeray so he could get to the undiscovered genie jar, said Vale. Which makes me wonder, said Tina, where are we going? You're the driver, I pointed out, which is actually super illegal. And do I even need to ask where you got the truck? I earned this truck along with the know-how to drive it, Tina paused. And the consequence? I pressed. Tina scowled. Now every time someone says my name, I have to clap my hands. That's interesting, Ridge said. Then he couldn't help but add, Tina. She lifted her hands from the steering wheel ever so briefly so she could clap them together once. I chuckled, and suddenly my socks felt wet, very wet. I glanced down to notice that Tina's clap had also caused my left shoelace to come untied. Not funny, Ridge, Tina said. I have to put up with this for a year. Forcing her to clap had been sort of funny, but now I had wet feet, paying the consequence for my laughter. Thanks for getting the truck, I said, tying my shoelace. It wasn't the only thing we got, she answered. Vale reached under the seat, withdrew an item, and passed it back to me. My backpack! I cried, taking the bag and peering inside. I saw a bunch of smashed sandwiches, a couple of empty water bottles, and a very important peanut butter jar. Thackeray didn't give it up willingly, Tina said, but my wolf insisted. She smiled slightly. Consider it my apology for leaving the way we did. Apology accepted. I rolled the magic peanut butter jar in my hands. A white car blew past us. As per my consequence, I dropped the jar. My hand darted up and clanging against my helmet as I saluted through the window. Did you wish for that? Vale asked. This odd old thing? I knocked at the side of the helmet. It was actually a consequence, but it's already saved me from at least one head injury, and with a 12-year-old driving, I might be glad I have it on. We're not going to crash, Tina said. That was part of my wish. And this thing won't run out of gas either, but I really don't know where we're going. Don't look at me, I said. You don't know what was on the next page of the notebook? Tina asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. Oh, I get it, I said with a hint of annoyance in my voice. You're wondering why I didn't accept another big consequence to find out what was written on the third missing page. How else are we supposed to know where to go? Vale asked. Tina, I pointed out. She clapped. My shoelace came untied. Don't put this on me, she called back. I got us this truck. You figure out where we have to go. Why don't you just rock, paper, scissors? Ridge suggested. I shot him a frustrated glance. The last time hadn't gone so well for me. You remember, I ended up with only one arm. Yeah, Tina said, rock, paper, scissors. She held out her fists to prove that she could play the game while driving. I rolled my eyes. Fine. Tina beat me again. Her rock crushed my scissors, causing me to sit back in defeat, my backward pants wrinkling in half a dozen uncomfortable places. Pouting, I glanced out the window and saluted another passing white car. What are you waiting for? Vale asked. We could be driving in the wrong direction. The sooner you make the wish, the better chance we have at beating Thackeray and Jathan. Vale was right. Begrudgingly, I turned to Ridge. I wished to know what was on the third missing page of Thackeray Anderthon's notebook. I felt my hourglass watch click out, but I didn't even bother looking down at it. I was getting better at gauging 30 seconds. If you want to know what was on that third page, said Ridge, then you won't be able to tell left from right for the next year. Left and right? I said, gesturing left and then right as if to prove that I currently knew the difference. I thought of all the times those directions were helpful, like when monster rock men were going to pound your friend and you shout, "On your left!" Or when evil stuffed bears are swarming and you yell, "Look out to the right!" There would be none of that if I accepted the consequence. That's a tough one, Ridge said. If you accept it, we're never taking directions from you, Val added. We have to know what was on that page, Tina stressed, and I knew she was right. I'll take it, I said. Bazang! And as knowledge of left and right departed from my brain, knowledge of what was on the third page of the notebook entered it. Okay, I said, holding out my hands. We have to go to Lake Michigan. At the mention of a state name, I jumped out of my seat, hitting the top of my head on the roof of the truck. Luckily, my knight's helmet prevented any harm, although my neck was growing tired of holding it up. What's in Lake Michigan? Tina asked. I jumped again, this time ducking so my helmet didn't hit. There's a red fishing boat with a yellow flag, I said. We have to dive under the boat and touch the bottom of the lake. Lake Michigan, Tina mused. I jumped again. Why do you keep doing that? Val asked. Ace took a consequence, said Ridge. Every time he hears the name of a state, he has to jump. So that's why he jumps when I say Michigan, Tina said. I jumped. Not funny, Tina, I said. She clapped. My shoelace came untied. We drove in silence for a moment, afraid to say anything that would spark a reaction from the other. Then Tina struck up where we'd left off. Lake, she said. I'm guessing that's in the state with the same name. I was grateful for her careful phrasing. Thinking back to my geography lessons in school, I remember that Lake Michigan was one of the Great Lakes. I think it's by Chicago, I said. So at least we're driving in the right direction, said Tina. How far is it? Asked Ridge. Tina glanced at me in the rear view mirror and raised her eyebrows to indicate that she didn't know. We'll have to check a map at a gas station, I said. Chicago's probably not that far. Chapter 27, and we're on page 216. Chicago was very far. The nice lady at the gas station said we were nearly 30 hours away. We had no choice but to drive on. By our estimates, we wouldn't arrive at Lake Michigan until dinner time the next day. Talk about a colossal waste of time, but I wasn't going to wish for a faster means of transportation, not while we had a truck that Tina was paying for. Val and Tina took turns driving. The girls didn't dare let me or Ridge behind the wheel, and I couldn't blame them. We drove fast. The no crashing feature of the wish protecting us from harm, the universe's magical shield stopping us from getting pulled over by the police. I was sure we were shaving time off our travel, but it was still a long ride. Sometime in the dark, early hours of the next morning, I awoke from a horrible dream. I couldn't remember it upon wakening, but I knew it had been awful. You've had those, right? They're not the kind that let you quickly fall back to sleep. I sat up and looked out the window. The two genies were asleep in the back seat. Tina was at the wheel to my right, or maybe it was my left. I couldn't decide. How are you doing? I kept my voice low, but it still sounded loud in the silence of the truck. We used to go on road trips, Tina said. We did? I asked, still groggy from sleep. Not you and me, said Tina. Me and my mom. She smiled. She used to do the most ridiculous things. Anytime we stopped at a traffic light, she'd burst into some opera song at the top of her lungs. Is she a good singer? I asked. Tina raised an eyebrow. Not at all, but it made me laugh. She shook her head. Our house was a mess. Mama collected all kinds of weird things. I used to be embarrassed by the knickknacks she'd put on the shelves. Old buttons, a dirty sock, pebbles, toothbrush. I never understood why she did so many strange things, but that's part of what makes me love her. I wasn't sure why Tina was opening up to me. Maybe she was overly tired. You have a big family? I asked. She shook her head. Just me and my mom now. She bit her lip, and I saw her eyes glistening in the dark cab. It was your mom, wasn't it? I said. The woman in the hospital? Now Tina nodded, but she didn't say anything more about it, so I pressed ever so slightly. How long has she been there? Tina swallowed hard. Going on 3 weeks, she muttered. She got so bad we couldn't stay at home. And our little town didn't have the medical care she needed. That's what brought us to St. Mercy's. Where do you live? I asked. Our house is a few hours outside Omaha, Tina answered. But I've been staying at my mom's room at the hospital. Nowhere else to go. Doctors don't know exactly what's wrong with her, but she's in a lot of pain. I grimaced. I don't know what it's like to have a mom, I admitted. But it can't be easy to go through this. I didn't know what else to say, so I went for total optimism. She'll probably start getting better soon. No, mumbled Tina. No, she's getting worse, Ace. Tina gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and there's nothing I can do about it. I glanced toward the genies in the back seat. What about Vale? I said. You could wish it. What do you think I tried? The moment I opened that lip balm jar, Tina said, I wished a dozen variations of the same thing, but it was just too heavy. Some consequences you just can't accept, no matter how badly you make the wish. I knew exactly what Tina meant. It had taken me 2 days to work up the courage to ask Ridge about my past, only to be dealt an impossible consequence. And no matter how desperately I wanted answers, I thought it must have been worse for Tina to watch her mother suffer. This undiscovered genie that Jathan was telling us about, said Tina, do you think he can really grant a free wish? I don't know, I said. Jathan and Thackeray seem to think so. There must be something different about him. Roosevelt's head said the genie was powerful, like scary powerful. And the cotton candy man said the jar was locked away for a reason. Don't you wonder what the reason is? She shook her head. Doesn't matter. We're talking about a free wish, Ace. Anything you want. The matron at the orphanage used to say that there's no such thing as a free lunch. I lifted an eyebrow, wondering what she might say if she knew I had paid for a lifetime supply of lunches with a smudge of peanut butter on my cheek. What's that supposed to mean? Tina said. That everything has a price, a consequence, I answered. Like cereal box toys, you don't just get a free toy. You bought the cereal, didn't you? You just compared the undiscovered genie to a cereal box toy? I shrugged. All I'm saying, from the warnings I've heard, I get the impression that the undiscovered genie isn't exactly the kind of genie you want to work with. This seemed to upset Tina. She scowled a bit, squeezing the steering wheel. You don't understand, she whispered. If our genies can't fulfill our greatest desires, then what's the use in being a wish maker? I said, reminding her of an obvious quest. Saving the world? But did you really go with Ridge just because you thought the world needed to be saved? She asked. Well, no. I muttered. Exactly, whispered Tina. If our genies can't get us what we really want, then I have to believe there's another one out there who can. I couldn't deny that the same thought had crossed my mind. It was no wonder Thackeray Anderson was so driven to find the undiscovered genie. If he could really do what Jathan claimed, wouldn't you want him to fulfill your greatest desire? There's a lot to think about, I said, feeling my heavy helmet clunk against the window as I rested my head. I just need to focus on my quest and stop the world from ending. It's the only thing I have control over. I glanced at her. And you should focus on saving Thackeray. She was quiet for a moment, and then she muttered, I don't think I will. You can't give up, I said. There's still time. Time for what? She asked. If you succeed, Jathan fails. If Jathan succeeds, you fail. The world is going to end, Ace, unless... Unless? I probed, but she didn't reply. We drove in silence for a while, and I felt sleepiness nipping at my eyelids once again. But I pushed past it, deciding instead to stay awake for Tina, in case she decided to say anything else. She didn't. And that's the end.